Hello everyone and welcome back to our virtual Mishnah Berurah share. We're holding a Mishnah Berurah Chelik Beis, and we will be learning today Mitzvah Hashem Daf Lamed Daled Amid Beis, and I'm going to try for Daf Lamed Hey Amid Aleph as well to make up some lost ground. So without further ado, let's get started. We pick up today on Lamed Daled Amid Aleph Siman Kuf Nun Beis at the bottom of the Shulchan Aruch in middle of Sif Aleph, right by the words of the Ramah Va'afilu. So we began already over here. We began over here already, Siman Kuf Nun Beis, and we learned in the beginning of Siman Kuf Nun Beis that you are not allowed to knock down a shul. And we learned the reason you're not allowed to knock down a shul is because of the Isra of Lo Sasun Kain La Hashem Elokeichem. We have a mitzvah say to destroy Avodah Zarah, but the pasuk says Lo Sasun Kain La Hashem Elokeichem. Certainly, you're not allowed to do that to a Bais HaKnesses. So we are not allowed to knock down a Bais HaKnesses. However, there is a heter to knock down a Bais HaKnesses in order to build a new Bais HaKnesses. That is not considered demolition. That's called binyan. That's not stira. It's stira almanas livnais. That would be mutter. That being said, we learned at the beginning of Sif Aleph over here that there is a takanas chazal that you're not allowed to knock down the original shul until you complete the building of the new shul. And we said the reason for that is mishum pshiyusa. We're afraid, like the Mechaber said, that after you knock down the original shul, something might come up, and now there will be a pshia. People will be negligent in building the new shul, and there's a risk that the new shul may never get built. So we knocked down a Bais HaKnesses kavua in order to build a new Bais HaKnesses. Now the new Bais HaKnesses never got built. That would be a disaster. So therefore the Chazal said, yes, you are allowed to knock down a shul in order to build a new one. However, you have to first complete the building of the new one, and only then are you allowed to knock down the old one. Now let's take a look here at the words of the Ramah. Says the Ramah, final three words on Lamed Daled Amid Aleph. Va'afilu loy rotzu listar rak mechitza achas laharchivoi. Let's say you're not looking to knock down the entire Bais HaKnesses. You want to expand the Bais HaKnesses. You're doing an extension. And you want to knock down one wall of the shul in order to push the shul out and make the shul larger. Says the Ramah, a very interesting thing. Nami dina hachi. What you have to do, says the Ramah, is you can't knock down the wall of the shul and then build the extension. You know what you have to do? First, you have to build the extension. When the extension is complete, then you could knock down the pre-existing wall of the shul and open up the shul to the extension. Why? Same svara. We're afraid you might go ahead, knock down a wall of the shul in order to extend the shul, and then something will come up. You'll have permit problems, you'll have fundraising problems, and then guess what will happen? The extension will never get built. Now you'll have a Bais HaKnesses with an open wall, and maybe they'll put up some kind of temporary tarps or something else, but that's not bakavidik. That's not the way it should be. Therefore, what you have to do is build the extension, and only when the extension is complete do you knock down the wall of the shul and open it up to the extension. Mishnah Berurah Ois Katan Ches here on Lamed Daled Amid Beis. Dina hachi. It's the same halacha, which is shein seisrin hamechitza. You're not allowed to destroy the wall of the shul. Ella, rather, what you need to do is bainin hachadash pitzad hayashan. You have to build the new extension alongside the pre-existing shul. V'achakach seisrin hayashan, and then you could knock down the old wall in order to open up the shul into the new extension. Okay, now we go weiter in the Mechaber's second line down, Lamed Daled Amid Beis, in middle of the line. Says the Mechaber, V'hani mili, when do these words apply? When does this whole halacha apply? That in order to knock down the old shul, you have to first complete the building of a new shul. V'hani mili shahaya harishan chazak. That's only true when the original shul is strong, it's viable, and as we're going to see, it can be used. Aval, however, im charvu yisaidosav, if the foundation of the existing shul has become undermined, if it's cracking, it's breaking, or natu kisalav lipail, or the walls of the shul are leaning, and it looks like the shul is in danger of collapsing. So what we have over here, in essence, is we have a shul that is beginning its collapse. We have a shul that ultimately is not really usable as it is. In that case, says the Mechaber, miyad. In that case, you destroy the shul right away. The reason he says miyad is because he's addressing a case where the foundations are cracked or the walls are leaning, so there's a risk of sakana. The building might collapse on somebody. In that case, says the Mechaber, miyad, you destroy the original shul immediately, umaschilan livnois b'mehera, and then you begin to build the new one very quickly, and you work bayayim uvalayla, work day and night to complete the new shul. So we should once again have a Bais HaKnesses kavua, and work day and night. Why? To ensure that some kind of pshia won't arise. Don't take your time and wait for some permit problems to crop up or some other problems to crop up. Once you knock down the original shul, work tirelessly and work day and night to build the new shul. Why? Shemet titchak hasha, because maybe some pressing event will come up during these times, opinion shvuyim, or like I said, permit problems or legalities or who knows what. V'yishar charev. And then we'll have the disaster of the original shul being destroyed and the new shul having not yet been built. Now, the Mechaber couches this halacha in the context of a shul shecharvu yisaydaisav aynatu kisalav lipail, where the foundation is cracked, the foundation is failing, or the walls are collapsing, and it's very easy to read into the Mechaber over here that what the Mechaber is saying is, usually you have to complete the new shul before you can knock down the old shul. But if you have a collapsing shul, so then there's mamish a sakana. If we're dealing with a situation where there's mamish a sakana involved, so then you're allowed to knock down the shul right away. So you might walk away from this saying the reason there's an exception to the rule over here is because of sakana. However, from looking at the achrayim and the paiskim and everything else, that's not really what's behind this halacha. What's behind this halacha is the fact that if you have a shul that me'ezatam cannot be used right now, it's not really viable. In that case, the takanas chazal is not appropriate in that case. The whole takanas chazal is you have a pre-existing shul. Right now, there is a viable, usable Bais HaKnesses kavua. We're not going to allow you to knock down a viable, usable Bais HaKnesses kavua in order to build another one, because we're afraid you're going to knock down the original one and then be negligent and not get the new one built. So we're not going to allow you to do that. Instead, you have to complete the building of the new one before you knock down the old one. But if the old shul is not really usable and viable, in that case, what are we gaining by telling you that you have to leave it up? It's not a usable, viable Bais HaKnesses anyway. In that case, knock it down. Knock it down and right away build the new one. So we're going to see, for example, that it's not only if the foundation is cracked. What if the government condemned the building, me'ezatam sheyiyah, right? So you can't use it. If you can't use it, you can't use it. Another case that's brought down by the paiskim is, let's say, they bring down a case, let's say you had a city, and the shul was in the downtown area, and all the Yidden used to live downtown. Now, all the Yidden moved out of the downtown area, and they all moved to a different section of the city. Something that comes to my mind, a very major Jewish community nowadays, Passaic, New Jersey. Really, Passaic, New Jersey, downtown Passaic was the original Jewish neighborhood. So you might have a shul that was built in downtown Passaic, New Jersey. There are no Yidden in downtown Passaic, New Jersey. Downtown Passaic, New Jersey, at least when I lived there in the 90s, it was a place that you didn't go. It wasn't a safe place. So if you have a shul in downtown Passaic, New Jersey, and now everybody moved out and they all live uptown in Passaic Park, so you want to build a new shul in Passaic Park, and you want to destroy the old shul in downtown, over there, the shul in downtown Passaic, New Jersey is not viable. It's not usable. Nobody's going there to use it. In that case, there's no benefit in saying that we should leave it up until you complete the building of the new shul. Nobody's using the old shul anyway. So in that case, there's nothing wrong with knocking it down. So this halacha of the mechaber, that also includes any other reason why the original shul is no longer a viable, usable shul. In that case, you could knock it down before you complete the building of the new one. Let's take a look here at the Mishnah Berurah Ois Katan Tes. Avalun Charvu. If for whatever reason the government issued an edict saying that the building can't be used anymore, and there's nothing to do to convince them otherwise, in that case you could knock it down. Kasav the Taz brings down, and this is similar to the case that I just gave you, the example of Passaic. Maisa be'ir achas, there was a Maisa that happened in one city. Shahayu ha'Yehudim darim chutz l'chayma. The Yidden used to live outside of the walls of the city. The Eira ha'inyan, and then the facts changed. Shenis yashvu b'sayich ha'chayma. The Yiddish community moved inside the walls of the city. V'haisa Bais HaKnesses levadei chutz l'chayma. Now you have the shul standing alone outside the wall of the city. And they want to knock down the old shul outside the walls and build a new shul inside the walls. Says the Taz, V'amarti, I said, Ein lecha tiyua gedola mizu. Tiyua is a crack. That's the lashon that the Chazal use. It comes to the Gemara in Baba Basra, that if you see a tiyua, if you see defects, cracks in the foundation of the shul, then you're allowed to knock it down before you complete the construction of a new shul. Said the Taz, if the old shul is outside the walls of the city and there's nobody living there, the shul is not viable. And therefore, says the Taz, V'hitarti listaraisa, I was matted them to knock down the shul, kedei livnoisa teichachayma, in order to build a new shul within the walls of the city. V'yaschilu livnois Bais HaKnesses HaKadosha, and they began to build the new shul. V'yitlu achakach ha'avanim min ha'yeshana, and they ended up taking rubble, taking stones from the old shul. V'yivnu teichachayma mehem, and they used it in the construction of the new shul within the walls of the city. There's a bir halacha dibra maskil soisrim, where the Chavetz Chaim says hainu afilu b'deleka duchta l'tzluye kaidim sheivnu hakadosh kein muchach midas harama. He says over here, the Chavetz Chaim, you're allowed to knock down the old shul before you build the new shul, even if you don't have another place to daven. The reason for that is because you're not gonna daven in the old shul. The old shul is not a viable, usable shul. So okay, you have a problem. You need to find a new place to daven. But right now, there's no reason not to knock down the old shul, because the old shul is not a viable shul anyway. So it's not a problem. Okay, now let's go to the Ramah, 3 lines off the bottom. Hagah. Says the Ramah, V'aser likach avanim mi Bais HaKnesses ha'yeshana kedei livnois chadasha. You're not allowed to take stones from an old shul and use them to build the new shul. Now, what case is the Ramah addressing over here? So let's take a look here at the Mishnah Berurah. This halacha of the Ramah is not going back on the mechaber that we just learned. The mechaber that we just learned told us a halacha that if the old shul is not viable, we're allowed to knock it down before we build the new shul. In that case, you could certainly knock down the old shul and take stones from the old shul and use them to build the new shul. So when the Ramah says over here, you're not allowed to take stones from the old shul to build a new shul, he's not going back on that halacha. So the Chavetz Chaim says, Inyan mifnei atzmahu. This is a new halacha. V'loi koi acharvu yisaydaisav. It doesn't go back on the halacha that we just learnt about an old shul that's not viable. Does bevadei mutar l'sasrei v'livdais bimenu sabinyan hachadash. Because in that case, certainly you could use the rubble of the old shul for a new shul. Ella rather, Areish HaSeifkoi. This halacha is going back on the beginning of the Siman, on the beginning of Sif Aleph. Da Bais HaKnesses Hayoshan Hu Shalem, where you have an old shul that is good, it's standing, it's strong, it's viable, and you want to build a new shul. V'kamairi, and we're talking about a case, Shekvar Hiskel Binyan HaChadosh. They started to build the new shul. And now they're short 100 bricks in order to finish the new shul. So we said you're not allowed to knock down the old shul until you finish construction on the new shul. No, we left the old shul standing. We're building the new shul. We need some bricks. Could we go peel some bricks off of the old shul and use it to complete the new shul? No. The rights of Lister Ayosha, now they want to do a demolition on the old shul. Kidei lahashlim HaChadosh, in order to complete the new shul. Are they allowed to do that? Kamash Balon, the Ramah tells me, Ta'afilu b'kahai gavna, even in such a case, she'ein stirasei shalzeh, where you're not doing the demolition on the old shul, ela lebinyanoi shalzeh, you're doing it mamish to build the new shul. Afilu hachi, you're not allowed to do it because kaishinan shemi ye'ara loy einis, because we're afraid some kind of einis might come up, v'lo yashlim, and the new shul will not become completed. V'alkein aser afilu be'ikadukta l'tzliyeh, and therefore it would be aser to do that even if you have a place to daven. Doesn't matter. You're still not allowed to break apart part of the old shul, even if you're doing it lehedya, in order to complete the new shul. Continues the Ramah here, the final few words of the Siman. V'aser listar davar mi Bais HaKnesses. Very, very, very interesting halacha over here. You're not allowed to destroy, says the Ramah, davar mi Bais HaKnesses. You're not allowed to destroy, literally it means, anything from the shul. Unless you're doing it in order to rebuild. What does this mean? Let's take a look here at the Mishnah Berurah's Katan Aleph, which is, we already saw part of this Mishnah Berurah, but let's see it again. V'aser listar davar, even min ha'heichal. Again, the source for the Isser of destroying a Bais HaKnesses is because it is akin to doing some type of destruction on the Beis HaMikdash chas v'shalom. The aser, which is aser, mishum shenamar, because the pasuk says, v'nitatztem es mizbechaisam. We have a mitzvah say to destroy a makom of avodah zarah, and then it says, lo'isasun kein l'Hashem l'keichem. You certainly have a chiyuv to do that to avodah zarah, but lo'isasun kein l'Hashem l'keichem. But you're not allowed to do that to the Beis HaMikdash. Ubeis HaKnesses, Ubeis HaMedrash, Kanke Nikra Migdash Ma'at. And we know that a Shul, a Bais HaKnesses, or a Beis HaMedrash is called a Migdash Ma'at. So the Isser of Leisasid Kein L'Hashem L'Keichem applies to a Bais HaKnesses and a Beis HaMedrash the same way it applies to the Beis HaMikdash. V'davka lintoitz u'l'shaber klei kodesh. But this Isser only goes on destroying or breaking Klei Kodesh. So not just the walls of the shul, but all sorts of Klei Kodesh, Lakar Davar Mechuber, or to destroy something that is attached to the building. Kamani Even Mi Mizbeach, like to break a stone off of the Mizbeach. Now Klei Kodesh, I assume that means that there's an Isser, you're not allowed to, let's say, smash a Kli Shares in the Beis HaMikdash. La Fuke, however, this stands in contrast to, this excludes, Lefanois HaKlei Kodesh V'asaf Solin. If you want to empty out the shul, you want to take out the pews, the benches, the tables, V'chadoima, Mi Bais HaKnesses, Av Shein Zeh Kavod LeBeis HaKnesses, even though that's not Pakovidik, to empty out the shul and leave it empty, Yesh Loima Shein B'Klal Zeh, but he brings down from the Maram Padava that would not be included in this Isser of Nesitza, of breaking or demolishing a Bais HaKnesses. Now take a look at the Bir Halacha, Dibra Maskil Davar Mi Bais HaKnesses. The words of the Ramah were, you're not allowed to destroy Davar, a thing, a part of the Bais HaKnesses. V'wadin Kol Kalei Bais HaKnesses, the Dinam Gamken Ke Bais HaKnesses. The Kalim of the Bais HaKnesses, You're not allowed to destroy. Kimavor b'Yerushalmi perek b'nei ha'ir. Uberambam perek Yud Aleph b'Hilchos Tefillah halacha tesvav. U'mistaber duadin l'nyazak k'mayche kasafti le'el. It's very interesting. So I'm not 100% sure what would be included in this. In Davar Bais HaKnesses. I didn't look to see. Curious. Is there a footnote here? Yeah. So Dirshu footnote number 13 says, V'din zeh kosev b'sefer tzedakah mishpat, shehu rak b'kelim ha'mishamshim l'tzorech ha'tfilah. We're talking about various utensils, vessels, kelim, that are used during the tefillah, during the davening. Kigoin, shulchanais, tables, safsalim, benches, I guess shtenders, the amud, aval shar kelim animtzarim b'Bais HaKnesses eilem shum kedusha. So we're not talking about the negavasa shisel. We're not talking about the sink. We're not talking about the plumbing fixtures. We're not talking about things like, well, even though that might be mechuber. That might be mechuber. So this Isser is not only going on the walls of the Bais HaKnesses itself. It's going also on the kelim of the Bais HaKnesses. Okay, so you're not allowed to destroy any part of the Bais HaKnesses, and the Ramah said, Elim kein ois almanas livnois. Ois cut yud beis, says the Mishnah Berurah. De'ein zen nesitza alabinyan. If you're doing it, if it's stir almanas livnois, if whatever demolition you're doing in order to rebuild, in that case, that's not called demolition. That's called binyan. That's part of building. Now the Mishnah Berurah says an interesting thing. Those that make, that literally what these words mean, those that attach a board to the wall of the Beis HaMedrash. And then they make a hole in the wall of the Shul. So that you should be able to support and hold up this board using a piece of wood. What is the Mishnah Berurah talking about? I'll tell you what the Mishnah Berurah is talking about. The Mishnah Berurah is talking about a shtender. You know what he means? He means, let's say this is a board, okay? And you have, alongside it, you have over here is the wall of the Bais HaKnesses. You want to make a shtender. What do? You take a board, you attach it to the wall with hinges. So now this board is hanging on the wall with hinges and it can swing up and down. And then when you want to use it as a shtender, you flip it up. And then what do? You take a 2x4, you take a piece of wood over here, and you have this piece of wood going to the wall, and you have a hole in the wall that the 2x4 rests in. And now this shtender is being supported. And then when you want to fold it down, you take the 2x4 out and you fold the shtender flat. That's what the Mishnah Berurah is talking about over here. So he says, l'chayra, in order to make this shtender, what are you doing? You're making a guma, you're making a hole in the wall of the Bais HaKnesses. Are you allowed to make that hole in the wall of the Bais HaKnesses? Or is that an Isser of Leisasun Kain? Is that Nesitza? Is that destruction of the Bais HaKnesses? So he says over here, Rabbi maybe many Achronim are mekel, Deloy Kitaz, not like the Taz who is Machmer. Okay, now, there are a few things that I want to speak about over here. Some of them are hinted to, at least, in the Dirshu footnotes. So first of all, we have this Isser of Loisasud Kein Lashem Elokeichem. What kind of Isser is this? It sounds like it is a Daraisa. It sounds like any kind of destruction that you're going to do to a Bais HaKnesses is an Isser Daraisa. So take a look at Dirshu footnote number 8, the first 3 lines of the footnote. Uvegeder Isser Nesisatz Even Mi Bais HaKnesses. As far as the Geder of this Isser, Kasav Minchas Chinuch, the Minchas Chinuch writes, Sheyesh Lihistapek Im Min HaTorah Ay Min D'Rabbanan. Is this really an Isser Daraisa? Or is it only an Isser Daraisa by the Beis HaMikdash, and our extending it to a Bais HaKnesses is like an Asmach de Ba'alma? Or is it a D'Rabbanan? Va'afimu min HaTorah yesh listapik b'loikim olav. And even if it is a daraisa, he questions whether or not it would be a lav that you would get malchus for. Now skip to the second paragraph of footnote 8. Umedivri Rambam b'minyan hamitzvos hakotzer, she'kosav she'ibud Bais HaKnesses areyu b'klalo iser shelo yisasu keil Hashem Elokeichem. The Rambam seems to write straight out in the Sefer Minyan HaMitzvahs that, yes, doing an act of destruction at a Bais HaKnesses is mamish included in the lav d'oraisa of loisasin kain. So lamdu hashelus etshuvas Avnei Nezer. The Avnei Nezer is a medayik in the Rambam. Shalodasa Rambam iser nesisas Bais HaKnesses u'min HaTorah. It's taka d'oraisa. Ach b'shalos etshuvas ein Yitzchak u'b'shalos etshuvas Chalkas Yoav kasvu shalodasa Rambam ein adavar eser elam d'Rabbanon ela shekol alaf yisurim d'Rabbanon b'lav zeh. So we have this question: is it a d'Rabbanon or is it a d'oraisa? Now the next paragraph. Ule'inyan shiur hanesitza ha'asura. What's the shiur? If I go to the wall and I make a scratch, is that nesitza? Kasav ha'arachayim sha'afilu nesitza kol she'yasura kol she'oisa roisham bebinyan. If you make an impression, that's already the yisur of loisasun kain. V'chein mashbek tas be'amavur b'Mishnah Berurah kaban sivkat yud beit she'asiyas gumo b'kaisel shaloi l'tzarech binyan asura. Right? The question of the stender. You're making a little indentation in the wall for the piece of wood that supports the stender to lean on. From the Mishnah Berurah mashba, that would be, that according to the Akrainim that aser, it would be aser. But he brings down over here from others, aval meidach hadas Torah kaser b'shem Maharal mi Prague v'huva b'shuvas shalos b'shuvas chidduch Beis Yehuda shemiktzas even muter l'insights. Okay, so we have this question. Now, Dirshu footnote number 9, the Mishnah Berurah said that there are those akrainim that are makel in the case of the stender. You can make the guma, you can make the indentation in the wall to support the stender, and it's not a problem. Dirshu footnote number 9, ubetama davar, why is this mutter? Bir b'shalos etshuvas igros Moshe, the Rishivas Atzal, Rav Moshe Zekasad v'Kadosh Levracha brings down. He says, shekeven shu tzarech hatfila, since this is for the purposes of davening, shehi ikar inyan shel Bais HaKnesses. What's the shul here for? The shul is here for davening. So you want to put up a stender, and you need to make a little indentation in the wall for the support of the stender so that you can daven. That's using the Bais HaKnesses for the purpose of the Bais HaKnesses. And therefore he says, for that, it would be mutter. Avalut tzarech akar also, for something else, it would taka be also. Okay. Now, there was something else that I wanted to mention here. Yes. I mentioned this question in the beginning of the Siman. And that is, so what are we seeing here? We're seeing over here that there's an iser to knock down a shul. There's a heter to knock down a shul if you're knocking it down in order to build a new one. The Chazal said, even in that case, you have to complete the new one before you knock down the old one, because we're afraid that if not, you might never come to complete the construction of the new one. So let me ask you a question. You left the old shul standing, you built the new shul. At this point, what heter do you have to knock down the old shul? You're not doing it in order to go ahead and facilitate building the new shul. You already built the new shul. So this is a very tough question to answer. Let's take a look here at the Biur Halacha. Dibur Amaschel Eli Im Kein Oisa Almanas Livnois. You're only allowed to knock down a shul if you're doing it in order to build a new one. Says the Chavetz Chaim, V'had mevur le'el. But this that is very clear from above. The mutter listar ayoshan, that you're allowed to knock down the old shul achar shenivne hakadosh, after you built the new shul. Why are you allowed to do that? Says the Chavetz Chaim, Hasam Shani. Over there it's different. Why? And now the Chavetz Chaim uses words that I'm not chopping what he means. He says like this, Hasam Shani, Shahayaritzaina mitchila, because it was their intent from the beginning, Lisasrai, to knock down the old shul, Litayelas lebinyan achadosh, in order to facilitate building the new shul. Ella, but they weren't allowed to knock down the original shul. Shirabanan asru azeh mishum pshiyusa. But mitam gzeres chachamim, they weren't allowed to knock down the old shul. V'habinyan hachodash banuhu, so they built the new shul, ba'oifin zeh, in this way, sheyisteru achakach, that they should destroy it afterwards, l'tayeles binyan hachodash, for the purposes of the new shul. Ulefikach, and therefore, like gara gamata misaiser amanaf livnois, it's therefore no worse than destroying it in order to build. Vishari and its mutter. I don't know what these words mean. Literally, what the Biur Halacha seems to be saying is, really, we have an eyes and a kasha. Why are you allowed to knock down the old shul? You're only allowed to knock down the old shul in order to facilitate building the new shul, right? So once you built the new shul, what heter is there to knock down the old shul? And for the Biur Halacha, well, let's take a look. Really, midaraisa, it would have been mutter to knock down the old shul right away in order to build the new shul. The only reason you weren't allowed to do it was because of a takanas chachamim. The chachamim asered it. Okay, so because the chachamim asered knocking down the old shul, they left the old shul standing while they built the new shul. But they built the new shul, ba'oifin zeh, says the Chofetz Chaim, in this way, that they're going to need to knock down the old shul when the new shul is finished being built in order to facilitate the new shul. So there are those that want to learn the Chofetz Chaim, that what the Chofetz Chaim means is like this. Really, we would have knocked down the old shul and built the new shul on the footprint of the old shul. But the Chazal said that we can't do that. So what we did instead was, we moved over one lot, and we built the new shul right next to the old shul. Now, when we built the new shul, we built windows in the wall that right now is right next to the old shul. So now that we've finished building the new shul, we want to knock down the old shul in order to open up the windows so that light should come in. Maybe we made doorways in that elevation of the building. Maybe we built doorways on that side of the building, and now we have to knock down the old shul in order to unblock, in order to gain access to the doorways. So there are those that want to learn the Biur Halacha, that what the Biur Halacha is saying is, the reason you're allowed to knock down the old shul is because the new shul was built in such a way that in order to not complete its construction, because the construction has to be complete, but in order to facilitate its full and proper usage, the old shul is in the way. So now you're allowed to knock down the old shul in order to facilitate full usage of the new shul. Okay, it's very nice, and that fits into the words of the Biur Halacha. But then what if that's not the case? What if they built the new shul 6 blocks away, and now they want to knock down the old shul? What's the heta then? Now, okay, there could be another case. Maybe, let's say, that the way they got the money for the new shul was, they sold the old shul on, kind of on a condition that the sale is not complete until the new shul is completed. Now the sale is complete, and part of the terms of the sale are that they have to knock down the old shul. So again, that would be another case where, yes, I'm knocking down the old shul in order to facilitate the completion of the deal that allowed us to build the new shul. But again, what if that's all not true? So there's a beautiful Chassam Sofer. The Chassam Sofer says, no, you're missing the boat. He doesn't say it in the Biur Halacha, obviously. But the Chassam Sofer says like this. The Chassam Sofer says, you don't understand. If you build a new shul to replace the old shul, part of the Takanas Chazal is that when the new shul is complete, the kedusha goes off the old shul, it goes on to the new shul, and the old shul loses the kedushas Bais HaKnesses. And now you're allowed to knock it down because there's no problem knocking it down. It doesn't have kedushas Bais HaKnesses anymore. The kedushas Bais HaKnesses went on to the new shul. Okay, now let's move along here to Siman Kuf Nun Gimel, and let's see what we could do on Lamed Hey Amin Aleph. A new Siman. Kuf Nun Gimel, Dine Binyan Bais HaKnesses Uboichaf Beis Seifim, the halachos that pertain to the construction of a Bais HaKnesses, and here we have 22 Seifim, says the Mechaber Sif Aleph. Mutter lasois Bais HaKnesses Bais HaMedrash. You're allowed to turn a Bais HaKnesses into a Bais HaMedrash. Now let's remember, a Bais HaKnesses is a building that's miyuchad litfila. The only thing it's used for is davening. There's no daf yomi shiurim in this room. This is a Bais HaKnesses. We daven shachris mincha ma'ariv. We don't use it for learning. Okay, then there's a Bais HaMedrash. A Bais HaMedrash is a room that's miyuchad limud. That's set aside for limud Torah, and they don't daven in it. So it's only there for limud Torah. So you have Bais HaKnesses lichud. The Bais HaKnesses is one type of building, and Bais HaMedrash lichud. The Bais HaMedrash is a different type of building, and the twain shall not mix. So we're not talking about what we have nowadays. We'll get to that soon. We're not talking about our shuls, which 99.99999% of them, I don't think I ever met one that isn't. Our shuls are Batei Midrashim as well. We use them for learning and for davening. So our Batei Midrashim, our Batei Knesiyos, our Batei Knesiyos, our Batei Midrashim. But back then it wasn't that way. They had a Bais HaKnesses l'chud and a Bais HaMedrash l'chud. Says the Mechaber, if you have a Bais HaKnesses, you're allowed to turn it into a Bais HaMedrash. Why? Because the Bais HaMedrash has a higher level of Kedusha than a Bais HaKnesses. A room that's miyuchad for limud Torah has a higher level of Kedusha than a Bais HaKnesses. So again, mutter lasois Bais HaKnesses Bais HaMedrash, because you're going up in Kedusha. Mailin b'Kedusha. Avaloi mi Bais HaMedrash Bais HaKnesses. But you cannot demote a building or a room from a Bais HaMedrash to a Bais HaKnesses, because that would be a yerida in Kedusha. Says the Biur Halacha, the first Biur Halacha here in the Siman, Dibra Maskal Mutter Lasois, V'hu adin shemutter limkar Bais HaKnesses. Therefore, you would be allowed to sell a shul, a Bais HaKnesses, Kedei Lasois Bais HaMedrash, because again, you're going up in Kedusha. Okay, now let's take a look here at the Mishnah Berurah. Mishnah Berurah is cut in Aleph. Bais HaKnesses Bais HaMedrash, Hu Mokam HaMiyuchad LiTorah. A Bais HaMedrash is a place that's miyuchad for learning Torah, and it's not used for davening. And it has a higher level of Kedusha. And this halacha is true even if you are not going to use this Bais HaMedrash for tefillah at all. The chiddush of the Mishnah Berurah is that the Mishnah Berurah is pointing out to you, realize that when we say you're turning a Bais HaKnesses into a Bais HaMedrash, that means you had a room that was miyuchad for tefillah, and now you are removing the Kedushas Bais HaKnesses from this room completely, because now this new Bais Medrash that you're turning it into is not going to be used for tefillah at all. You're never going to daven in it. So it was a building or a room that had Kedushas Bais HaKnesses because it was used for davening. Now you are taking it away. It is no longer going to be used for tefillah, and you're going to use it for learning. You're going to use it as a Bais HaMedrash. Points out the Mishnah Berurah that still in all, afilu hachi, says the Mechaber that that's mutter. Because even though you're wiping out the Kedushas Bais HaKnesses, you're wiping out the tefillah aspect, you're going up to the Torah aspect, to the Bais HaMedrash aspect, and that's Mailin B'Kedusha. Kasav HaMagen Avram, the Magen Avram writes, Tzarich Iyun, we have to look into the halacha. Im mutter lasois Bais HaKnesses Bais HaMedrash liyochid bebeisoi. Let's say somebody had a shul in his basement. He had a Bais HaKnesses in his basement. Wasn't used for learning, was only used for davening. Now he wants to evict the Bais HaKnesses, and he wants to make his own personal private Bais HaMedrash. So he'll say, I'm elevating it to a Bais HaMedrash. Well, not so quick. Over here, what you're doing is, you're taking away a Bais HaKnesses from a tzibur, and you're making a Bais HaMedrash of a yochid. He says that's tzarchian. Ubel Yerabba mitzad l'akmer b'zeh el Yerabba takes the position to be makmer and say that that's aser. V'chein mashma b'meiri sham b'megillah, and the meiri in Megillah is mashma that way as well. Now in Sharitzia and Ois Katan Aleph, the Chavetz Chaim points out that this that he said that this halacha of the Mechaber is true, even if you're not going to use this new Bais Medrash for davening at all. He says that's very clear from the Gemara in Megillah, because there is a Manda Amar in Megillah who says it's usher to make a Bais HaKnesses into a Bais HaMedrash. Now, if we're talking about a Bais HaMedrash where you're also going to daven, why would anybody usher turning a Bais HaKnesses into a Bais HaMedrash? You're not taking away the Kedushas Bais HaKnesses, you're davening in this new Bais HaMedrash also. So it's still a Bais HaKnesses. Just until now it was a Bais HaKnesses, and now you're making it a Bais HaMedrash and a Bais HaKnesses. Why would anybody answer that? So from the fact that there's a Madamar and Megillah who answers this, it's clear that we're talking about a case where it was a Bais HaKnesses, and now you're not going to use it as a Bais HaKnesses at all. You're only going to use it as a Bais HaMedrash. And still in all, the Mechaber Paskins that you're allowed to do that, because you're stepping up from a Bais HaKnesses to a Bais HaMedrash. Now, if you take a look in the Dirshu footnote number 1, he says a very interesting thing. I was wondering about this, and I guess that's why I'm bringing it up, even though I still want to do a lot more. He brings up the question over here. When you take this Bais HaKnesses and you elevate it in Kedusha to a Bais HaMedrash, it's true that the Bais HaMedrash has more Kedusha than a Bais HaKnesses. But we pointed out earlier when this halacha came up that in certain ways a Bais HaMedrash has a kula over a Bais HaKnesses. For example, in a Bais HaMedrash, a Talmid Chacham in a Bais HaMedrash has a heter to eat and drink, has a heter to sleep. So in some ways there are kulas that a Bais HaMedrash has over a Bais HaKnesses. So what happens when you turn this Bais HaKnesses into a Bais HaMedrash? Do those kulas kick in? Turns out it's a very funny thing. You're right, in one way we're malin b'kodesh, and we're elevating it in stature. In Kedusha, it's going from a Bais HaKnesses to a Bais HaMedrash, but at the same time, halachically, there are now kulas that pertain to this room that didn't pertain before. So, in Dirshu footnote number 1, u'mikamakam kasav ha'mekarchayim shelo yeh dinoi kistam Bais HaMedrash. This new Bais HaMedrash is not going to have the same halacha as a typical Bais HaMedrash. Meaning, in a Bais HaMedrash, mutar lishayin oilechol by gam shaloi b'shas chak. In a Bais HaMedrash, you're allowed to sleep, you're allowed to eat, even if it's not a shasat chak. Kibuvur baramola el sibikuftan alef sif alef obushuganar sham sif gimel lefisha nish'eres olav gam kedushas Bais HaKnesses. Because this new Bais HaMedrash, it doesn't lose the kedushas Bais HaKnesses. You don't wipe out the kedusha of the Bais HaKnesses and replace it with the kedushas Bais HaMedrash. The kedushas Bais HaKnesses is b'mkoimo yamedes, and now it steps up to kedushas Bais HaMedrash. It reminds me of the Gemara Baba Kama that is a whole clair when a shar tam becomes a shar muad. So now does it only go up in chumras? But sometimes there could be a kula now. They're like the chatzi nezek, right? The tam pays chatzi nezek, the muad pays nezek shalom. Is it pshat that the chatzi nezek of the tam is b'mkoimo emedes, and now we're adding on another chatzi nezek for the muad? Or is it pshat that no, the tzad tamus is gone? This animal is not a tam anymore. Now it has a new din of only being a muad. So too over here. Are we wiping out the Kedushas Bais HaKnesses and replacing it with Kedushas Bais HaMedrash? In that case, these kulas would kick in. Or maybe no. We're elevating the Kedushas Bais HaKnesses is b'mkoimo emedes, and now it goes up in level to Kedushas Bais HaMedrash, but all the chumras of Bais HaKnesses remain in place. That's the way the Mekarchayim learns. Ulam, however, b'shal zechuvas ksav sofer kasav, Shelo yeh alav eladin Bais HaMedrash. Ksav Sofer learns not that way. He says the Bais HaKnesses aspect is gone. Now it's a Bais HaMedrash. V'yeh mutar lishon v'lechol boy. V'chein kasav Yeshuas Yaakov shemutar. Kevet she'af b'Bais HaKnesses mutar b'shas chak. Okay. Now let's go down to the third paragraph of this Dirshu footnote number 1. V'af Bais HaKnesses shaloimdim boi sha'achas bilvad. Even a shul with is only a 1-hour shiur. Kasav ber hetiv b'shem shal tzuvas tvar Shmuel shen nechshav ki Bais HaMedrash. That's called a Bais HaMedrash. And now go down to the next paragraph. Ubate knesiyos bizmanenu, our shuls. That's a going to Reb Shlomo Zalman Auerbach. shekemat kulam dinam kibes medrash. All of our Bati Kedisiyais are Bati Midrashais. Shaharei loim debem Torah. What Bais HaKnesses is there where we don't learn Torah? Okay. Weiter. The Mechaber said you could turn the Bais HaKnesses into a Bais HaMedrash, but not vice versa. You can't turn a Bais HaMedrash into a Bais HaKnesses. Mishnah Berurah is cutting bays, avaloi, shemalin b'kodesh vein meriden, because you're only allowed to go up in Kedusha, you cannot go down. Okay, I know it's late, but I want to go weiter. Sif Beis. B'nei ir shemachru Bais HaKnesses. If the people of the city sold a shul. Okay. The people of the city sold a shul. Yecholim likach b'damav teva. They're allowed to use the proceeds from the sale of the shul in order to purchase an Aron Kodesh. What does that mean, a teva? Says the Mechaber. Dahainu heichel shemanicha by Sefer Torah. That's the Aron Kodesh that we put the Sefer Torah in. Ailuach shemamidin malav Sefer Torah. Or the bima that we put the Sefer Torah directly on. What's the halacha that the Mechaber is saying here? So the Mechaber in Sif Aleph told me, I'm allowed to be malin b'kodesh, I'm allowed to go up in Kedusha, and I could change a Bais HaKnesses into a Bais HaMedrash. But I cannot go down in Kedusha and change a Bais HaMedrash into a Bais HaKnesses. So too now, says the Mechaber. You sold a shul, so okay, you're now holding proceeds, you're now holding money that has Kedushas Bais HaKnesses. What could you do with this money? Well, you could level up. How do you level up? An Aron HaKodesh has more Kedusha than a shul. So you're allowed to take the proceeds and buy an Aron Kodesh. If you have a bima, now the Aruch HaShulchan says clearly that when we're talking about a bima here, we're talking about a bima where you put the Sefer Torah down on the bima without a cover, so that the Sefer Torah is going directly onto the bima. Not that the bima has a beautiful velvet cover. In that case, the velvet cover is a tashmish kedusha, but the bima is not. It's a tashmish to tashmish. Or if you have a table that you only put the Sefer Torah on when the Sefer Torah is wrapped in the mantle, then again, that wouldn't apply. But if you have a bima where you take the uncovered Sefer Torah and you put the uncovered Sefer Torah directly down on the uncovered bima, then the bima has the same din as the Aron Kodesh. So if you have proceeds of a shul, you could level up and use those proceeds in order to buy an Aron Kodesh or a bima. Now let's break right away over here and take a look at the Mishnah Berurah. Mishnah Berurah is cutting gimel. Shemachru Bais HaKnesses. You have a tzibur that sold a shul. Says the Mishnah Berurah, the lashon of the Mechaber sounds like it's a lashon of b'di'evet. Tzibur b'nei o'ir shemachru. They went there b'di'evet. They already did it. They already sold it. Now you're holding the proceeds. What are you allowed to do? You're allowed to level up to buy an Aron Kodesh. Says the Mishnah Berurah, no. Says the Mishnah Berurah is cutting gimel. Va'afil lechatchila nami mutar limkar kedei liknois ilui kedusha. You're allowed to do this lechatchila. If you want to level up, if you want to sell the shul so that you could buy an Aron Kodesh, that's a level up. You could do that even lechatchila. It's not only b'di'evet. Lechatchila you could sell the shul to use the money to level up to an Aron Kodesh. But, says the Mishnah Berurah right away, first of all, v'had noket shamachru, the reason it uses the lashon of di'evet, hainu mishum seifa, that's because of the halacha that we're going to learn soon in the end of the sif, the laharid mikedusha, that if you're trying to level down in kedusha, afilu kfar machru aser, that even in the case of di'evet, that would be aser. Now, comes a very important part of this Mishnah Berurah. V'ayin l'kaman b'sif yud gimel b'bir halacha. He points us to a bir halacha that we're going to learn later on in Sif Yud Gimel. Masha kasavnu sham, the Chavetz Chaim says what we're going to write over there. Im le'ilui kedusha, if in order to level up in kedusha, mutar limkar Bais HaKnesses, are you allowed to sell a shul? Ki she'ein lo Bais HaKnesses acheres. The halacha that the Chavetz Chaim just said is, you're allowed to level up even lechatchila. So it sounds like mamish lechatchila, you could sell the shul in order to build to buy an Aron Kodesh. Now what are you going to do with Aron Kodesh? Where are you going to put it? You don't have a shul. And where's the tzibur going to daven? You're going to leave the tzibur standing out in the street because you leveled up in Kedusha and you sold the shul in order to buy an Kaidish? So the Bir Halacha says weiter, of course you can't do that. What we're talking about over here is where there is a Bais HaKnesses kavua. Maybe you abandoned the old shul, you built a new shul, and now you want to sell the old shul and use the proceeds of the old shul to buy an Aron Kodesh. Yeah, you could do that 100%. But you can't sell the shul and leave the tzibur out in the street in order to buy an Aron Kodesh, even though you're leveling up. Can't do that. And we'll see that Bir Halacha inside later on. Ois Katan Daled, Yechelim Likach, you could sell the shul and use the proceeds to level up to buy an Aron Kodesh. Shekol zeh tekachashiv pai, because everything that we're going to learn here in Sif Beis, hu ha'alav b'kedusha, they're all going to be step-ups, all level up. So now let's read through the whole Sif Beis in the Mechaber. I'm going to start again from the beginning of Sif Beis. B'nei ha'ir shebachru Bais HaKnesses, if the people of the city sold a shul, yechelim likach b'dam av teva, they could buy an Aron Kodesh, because that's a level up. Or they could buy a bima shemamidin alav sefer Torah, that a bima that the sefer Torah goes directly upon, uncovered, because that's like an Aron Kodesh. So that's also a level up. Machru teva, let's say the tzibur sold an Aron Kodesh. Oh, yechaylim likach bedamav mitpachas shel sefer Torah. You sold an Aron Kodesh, you could buy a mantle. You could buy a mantle and a gartel. Why? Because even though the Aron Kodesh holds the Sefer Torah and the mantle holds the Sefer Torah, but the mantle, says the Aruch HaShulchan, the Sefer Torah is mamish wrapped up in the mantle and the gartel. That's different than the Aron Kodesh that typically holds the closed up Sefer Torah. But the etzem Sefer Torah is not wrapped up in the Aron. So again, the mantle, the gartel, that's a step up from the Aron. So you sold an Aron, you could buy a mantle and a gartel. Machru mitpachas, let's say you sold a mantle, a gartel. Loichin bedamea svarim, you could buy svarim. What does svarim mean over here? Over here, svarim means, the Macabre explains himself. He says, Loichin bedamea svarim, you could buy sifrei kedusha, dahainu. What kind of Sifrei Kedusha? Shekasav kol chumash levadoi. If you have a Sefer Bereshis that was written on klaf in Ashuris, like a Sefer Torah with Atzei Chaim, that's the kind of svarim we're talking about over here. It doesn't mean that you could sell a mantle and you could buy a shas. No, you could sell a mantle and you could buy a Sefer Bereshis written like a Sefer Torah. You could buy even V'chein, continues the Mechaber, V'chein Nevi'im Uksuvim. You could buy a Yeshaya written on a klaf, a Yirmiyah written on a klaf. So why is this? Because again, you're leveling up. You're taking a mitpakas, you're taking a mantle or a gartel that the Sefer Torah is wrapped up in, so it has a tremendous amount of Kedusha, but you're using the proceeds to buy Sifrei Kedusha that have intrinsic Kedusha. The intrinsic Kedusha is a level up from something like a mantle that wraps up a Sefer Torah. But again, Sifrei Kedusha means svarim that are written on klaf. That's the kind of Sifrei Kedusha that we're talking about over here. Machru svarim, continues the Mechaber, if you sold these kind of Sifrei Kedusha, so you have a shul that lanes the HaTorah from a klaf, you sold a Yeshaya. How do you level up now? Loichin b'demein Sefer Torah. Now you could level up to a Sefer Torah. Aval ipcha, but to go in the other direction, lahiridan mikdushasan, to step down in kedusha, aser, that's aser. Va'afilu im kanu b'ktsas hamoyis davar shekedusha kamura. Even if you want to divvy up the money, so let's say what you want to do is you want to sell a mantle, and with part of the proceeds you're going to buy a Yeshaya. And then with the leftover money, you want to buy a shas. No, you're not allowed to do that. You can't use even some of the money for a lesser kedusha. Now let's see the rest of the Mishnah Berurah here to Sif Beis. Says the Mishnah Berurah, You could buy all of these various things. Shekol zedek achashapai hu hala b'kedusha. All the things that we're saying you're allowed to do is because they're all level ups in kedusha. He said you could sell a mantle or a gartel and you could buy sifrei kedusha, and he explained what do we mean sifrei kedusha, a sefer of kol chumash lavadoi, each sefer of chamish chamushay Torah on its own. They would write the individual svarim of chamish chamushay Torah like a sefer Torah on klaf, ashuris, begalila, on a scroll, or betfiras gidin, sewn together with gidin, mamish like a sefer Torah. But it would only be a sefer bereshis, a sefer shmais, a vayikra, b'amidbar, dvarim. But those are the kind of sifrei kedusha that you could buy with the proceeds of, let's say, a mantle. Or you could sell a mantle and buy a Yeshaya, a Yirmiyah, that's written on klaf in Ashuris with all the dinim of the Sefer Torah. Shavim l'chumashim, these devim iksuvim are equal to a chumash written like a Sefer Torah, le'inyan sheyesh ilui b'kdushasa mimit pachas, in the context of the halacha that it's considered a level up from a mantle, the yachal l'kdoisam b'dmei mit pachas, so you could buy, let's say, a Yeshaya with the proceeds of a mantle. Umikamakan lo'ishavim l'chal tzad. But a Yeshaya is not equal to a Sefer Shemois in every way. The Kedushas Chumashim ha'asuyim beglila, the Kedusha of a Sefer of Chumash written on a cloth, is Gedoyla mehen, is bigger than a Yeshaya. Va'asa likach b'demei Chumashin neviyim uksuvim. You would not be allowed to sell a Sefer Bereshis in order to buy a Yeshaya. Ub'demei neviyim uksuvim, but if you want to sell a Yeshaya, loikchim Chumashim, you would be allowed to buy a Sefer Bereshis. Uneviyim uksuvim gufa, when it comes to Nach, Novi, and Ksuvim, Kiadodininu. He paskins the Mishnah Berurah that they're equal. The Chumashin Shalanu, our Chumashim, our printed Chumashim, Afilu Kol HaChamisha Hayu Kruchin Yachad, even our Shul Chamisha Chumshei Torah, Gara Me Chumash Echad also Ketikut Sefer Torah. It would have a lesser Kedusha than a Sefer of Chumash written on a scroll. So all of these level ups you're allowed to do. Aval ipcha, but to go in the other direction, Dahainu Sefer Torah, to sell a Sefer Torah, Likach Chumashim, to buy a Sefer Bereshis written on a scroll, V'chein Mechumashim mit Pachas, or to sell a Chumash to buy a mantle, V'chein Bekulu, those would be level downs, those you would not be allowed to do. Just looking. Okay, that's in the next sif. Okay, we're going to stop over here because we're already pushing close to an hour. But Baruch Hashem, we did most of Lamed Hey Amid Aleph. I hope that that's going to help us pick up a page. Looks like tomorrow's page is not that long, so hopefully this will have allowed us to pick up a page. Thank you so much for joining me for limud HaTorah. Discussing limud HaTorah should be Megan against Klal Yisrael. The Rebbeinu Shalom should send Yeshua's refuahs Parnassah Shedukim to all those in need. We should be zeicher to see the Bias Gal Tzedek B'meherav Yameinu. Amen. Be well.